Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 80. Today's episode is going to take a look at something I've covered on this channel a few times already, but in a way that I've yet to cover it. State-based actions, or SBAs, are one of those hidden things in the game that most players are not aware of, yet they are checked hundreds, if not over 1,000 times in a typical game of Commander. If you haven't seen Tough Rules and Cool Interactions episode 38, I will link it down in the video's description, as it is covering an SBA known as the Legend Rule, and we're going to be talking about that a good bit in this episode, so please do watch that before you do watch this video if you're not familiar with the Legend Rule. So today's episode is going to focus on one of the legendary creature team-ups that we got from March of the Machine, and that is Hidetsugu and Kairi. I looked up multiple pronunciations for Kairi, but they were all pronouncing it as Kari or Kairi or Kairi. But one of my buddies who is much more familiar with Japanese culture than I am told me that it is more of a three-syllable pronunciation of Kairi. So that's how I'm going to be pronouncing it as for this episode. Let me know if I am butchering it. I probably am. Now, onto the card. Hidetsugu and Kairi is a flying creature for 2 blue-blue-black, and it has 2 triggered abilities. The first one is an ETB effect that says, when Hidetsugu and Kairi enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Basically, it's your typical brainstorm effect. Then, the second ability is a dies triggered ability, and it says, when Hidetsugu and Kairi dies, exile the top card of your library. Target opponent loses life equal to its mana value. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. I would say that this effect, and this creature in general, is similar to what you see on Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow, and the fact that it has a built-in way to stack your top deck to be what you want, as well as letting you cast the spell if it fits the instant sorcery type from your hand, rather than just going to your hand, means that this could possibly be a very popular commander, and I've already played it a couple times. And one match in particular is what I'll be referencing in this episode. So in that game that I played, my opponent was using the Legend Rule to try to abuse the 2 triggered abilities on Hidetsugu and Kairi, rather than reanimating the creature after it kept dying. My opponent used clone spells so that the clone would die, and they were also using Blade of Selves, an equipment which grants Myriad to the equipped creature, to great effect so that they would be getting 2 ETBs and 2 dies triggers each of their own combats. Funny enough though, they were doing themselves a little bit of a disservice with the use of Blade of Selves and the other effects. Many players in Magic understand what happens when multiple triggered abilities happen at the same time. Like, you cast a Reshape the Earth, which lets you put up to 10 lands onto the battlefield from your library all at once. And you also have out something like a Felidar Retreat and a Rampaging Balos. Felidar Retreat lets you landfall, make a creature token, or put counters on all of your creatures and give them vigilance until end of turn. And then the Rampaging Balos lets you make creature tokens each landfall. So in this case, if you did put 10 lands out with the Reshape, you would have 20 triggered abilities on the stack, and 10 of those would be from the Felidar Retreat, and you get to pick which of the 2 options for each one. And for all 20 of them, you can decide the order of them resolving from the stack. Maybe you want the 10 beasts from the Rampaging Balos to be created first, and then maybe you want all of them to get 10 +1/+1 counters. Or perhaps you would like to get the 10 beasts, then get 5 Cat Beast tokens from the Felidar Retreat, and then finally have all 15 of those creature tokens get their 5 +1/+1 counters. So what does all this have to do with Hidetsugu and Kairi, the Legend Rule, and everything else that I've talked about? Well, when my opponent attacked, they did their triggers as such. They did Myriad happening, and getting 2 new Hidetsugu and Kairis would enter the battlefield, triggering their ETBs. Then the Legend rule would check, making them send the 2 token versions to the graveyard and keeping the original that still has that equipment on it. And then they would have their 2 dice triggers go onto the stack. They would resolve those 2 dice triggers first, since they were the topmost objects on the stack, and then they would resolve their 2 ETB triggers as they were buried afterwards on the stack. After they did this the second time is when I asked them why they were doing them in that order, as it's clearly more beneficial to use the ETB ability to set up your top 2 cards to be big instants and sorceries first, but they didn't know how the state-based actions of the Legend rule really worked in conjunction in this situation with the triggered abilities. I told them that they could actually pick the order for all 4 of these triggered abilities, and this is why that is. So we can see in the comprehensive rules that cover triggered abilities, this is in section 603, and we're going to look specifically at CR 603.3 that says, once an ability has triggered, its controller puts it onto the stack as an object that's not a card the next time a player would receive priority. The ability becomes the topmost object on the stack. It remains on the stack until it is countered, it resolves, a rule causes it to be removed from the stack, or an effect moves it elsewhere. Now, there's a very important bit in there that says the next time a player would receive priority. And if you're familiar with SBAs that I've covered on this channel, then you will know that SBAs are checked before a player would get priority. You can check out Comprehensive Rules 704.3 for more information on that. So what this means is that yes, the Hidetsugu and Kairi are entering the battlefield first and then dying later. But with how the game processes all of this with state-based actions and priority, at the time that the player actually places these 4 triggered abilities onto the stack and makes the choices for them, all of that is done at the same time. It isn't 2 triggers on the stack and then 2 triggers on the stack. It's all 4 at one game moment. In Magic, there are quite a few other cards that have ETBs and dice triggers on them, but for a lot of them, the order doesn't really matter all too much like Hidetsugu and Kairi. But there are a few. Something like the Cavalier Cycle comes to mind, and also keep in mind that if you are doing any shenanigans with this sort of stuff, where triggered abilities go onto the stack, if those triggered abilities do have the word target on it, then you do have to have that target picked when that trigger does go onto the stack. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining, at least. And I hope that a few of you, I'm sure you may have found my pronunciation of Kairi entertaining. And I hope that even some of you have learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta!